Welcome everybody to London Vegans monthly meeting, and I'm Brian Jacobs. I organise the events for London Vegans, and it is our great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for this evening. That's Joyce D'Silva. Joyce has been involved with compassion in world farming for many years. That's right here. She was former CEO of CIWF. When she retired, she then became their Ambassador Emeritus, and she's involved, I think, with one as a trustee with their organisation as well. But for this evening, she's going to talk about animals in world religion, and this ties in with the book that she's written. I'm sure she's going to tell you more about the book as well. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Joyce. Oh, excuse me. If you have any questions, please do hold on to them towards the end of the meeting. I'll be the PowerPoint display is going to be on my computer, so she'll just say move on, and hopefully I'll be able to control the display of the slides. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Joyce. Thank you, Joyce.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming. And Brian, if you can bring up the PowerPoint.
Yeah,
because
I'm doing that.
I'm just seeing myself, which you started screen sharing. Good, wonderful.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so animals and us is what I called it. Okay, Brian, you can push on.
Okay.
So this talk is based on my book, which was published in 2023, Animal Welfare and World Religion. And it kind of combines all the animal welfare knowledge, if you like, that I've learned since I joined Compassion in 1985. But also I used to teach RE in the dim distant past. And I always thought it would be good to bring the two things together and see what do the world religions actually say about animal welfare. And if they say good things, which most of them do they actually live up to it in practice? Not so great. So you can see lots of lovely people said nice things about my book. Carry on, Brian. So I'll just go through some of the major religions and a couple of not so major. So Judaism, and obviously God is recorded as saying, I established my covenant with every living creature on earth, not just with humans. Next one. But there's a very good basis for a vegan diet right at the beginning of the Bible, the Old Testament, Bereshit, which is what Jewish people call it. And God said, behold, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. So if anyone tells you you're a Christian or a Jew and you shouldn't be a vegan, you just quote this one. God said it. Okay, next, please. So, and carry on. Unfortunately, as soon as God said that he had made the covenant with every creature as well as with humans, he also said, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. So now it was okay to eat meat. Okay. And obviously, sacrifice was common in Old Testament times. It was common in virtually every religion around the world. You wanted to please God, or you were terrified and you wanted to make peace with God. And so you gave your best things. Sometimes, of course, in some religions, or lack of religion, you gave your own child. But usually you gave probably your finest animal, your best sheep or goat or whatever it was. But, you know, even in some of the books of the Old Testament, the whole thing is questioned. For the fate of humans and the fate of animals is the same. As one dies, so dies the other, as we know. They all have the same breath, and humans have no advantage over the animals, for all is vanity. So that's quite interesting, saying we don't have advantage over the animals. And it's just vanity to think that we do. Okay, Brian? So there was a very famous Jewish scholar, any Jewish person will know about Maimonides. And it's interesting, this is kind of the crux of the matter. He said all other beings too have been intended for their own sakes and not for the sake of anything else. And this argument comes up again and again in Judaism and Christianity. Are animals there for us, or are they there for themselves? Okay, next. But there's a really good Jewish teaching, which is that human beings must avoid, and I'm sorry if anyone speaks Hebrew because I don't, Sabalai Haim, causing pain to any living creature. So that's really important, that Jews are told they must avoid causing pain to any living creature. Okay, next. And it goes further. The righteous person regards the life of his animal. Obviously, this implies that the animal belongs to him, probably not to her. And if you're righteous, well, you look after the animal, you care for it. Okay. And can you just click again and some writing will come up, Bram? So Jewish teaching says on the Sabbath, both you and your animals shall rest. Okay, click again, please. But if you look at these broiler chickens in a shed, and broiler chicken farming is basically the same all over the world. This farm could be in China, it could be in the States, it could be in England. Thousands of chickens crowded in a shed where they live a very short life, 5 weeks, 6 at the most, before they're slaughtered for meat. But do they have a day of rest? Your animals are meant to rest. Well, these chickens aren't getting a day of rest. Okay, next, please. However, there is quite a lot of radical Jews, and apparently the majority of the chief rabbis of Israel, since Israel was established, have been vegetarian. But Rabbi David Rosen is interesting because he is a vegan. He's got a CBE from the Queen in the UK, and he's international president of the World Conference on Religions and Peace. And he said that truly religious Jews and all people of moral sensibility should avoid animal products as much as possible. And he keeps putting out this very strong vegan message. So he's a good ally to have. Okay, next. We're moving on to Christianity. Okay, next, please. So there are things in the New Testament which are quite kind of confusing. Does Jesus care about animals or not? Okay, just you have to click. There are 4 items here, Brian. So the bad spirits entering the doomed pigs. The story where the spirits enter this herd of pigs and they all rush into the lake and drowned. Not a very happy story. And then when Jesus drove the animals out of the temple, apparently used a whip. And obviously, he also helped the disciples catch more fish when they weren't catching many. And he gave St. Peter permission to kill and eat anything. But, there are all sorts of reasons for all these things. And really, it meant that Peter could talk to Gentiles and not just Jews. Okay, carry on. So there are helpful instances. So Jesus started out his ministry spending 40 days in the wilderness, and it says he was with wild beasts. So it's quite interesting. He obviously wasn't harmed by the wild beasts. Was he able to communicate with them? We just don't know. It doesn't say. And of course, although he whipped the animals out of the temple, he did actually stop the animal sacrifice going on in the temple. And he says, not one of them, the birds, not one of them is forgotten in God's sight. And of course, he then created the most amazing vegan meal, bread and wine. Okay, next, please. So, yeah, I put up Aristotle, who was not a Christian, but had a huge influence on Christianity. And he's an interesting guy because most people don't know he grew up on a farm. He was fascinated by animals, farm animals, and wrote a whole sort of study on what you should feed them to make them grow well. But he really was fascinated by animals. But of course, he also said, nature has made all animals for the sake of man. So that's his argument coming up again. Okay, next, please. And you see this also being repeated by very famous saints like St. Thomas Aquinas. According to the divine ordinance, the life of animals and plants is preserved, not for themselves, but for man. So animals are there for us. This same old argument. Next, please. And you find it with Martin Luther, one of the big founders of Protestantism. The beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven were created for mankind. These are the wealth and possessions of men. So Luther may have been radical in some ways, but not very radical about the place of animals in society. Next, please. However, there were some goodies around, and we go back quite a long way to St. Isaac the Syrian, who was a bishop in Syria. And I really love this quote from what he wrote. A merciful heart is a heart on fire for the whole of creation, for humanity, for the birds, for the animals. Good old St. Isaac. And St. Francis, of course, not to hurt our humble brethren is our first duty to them, but we have a higher mission. God wishes that we should help them whenever they require it. And apparently St. Francis used to buy lambs if he saw them being taken to the slaughterhouse. And, you know, if he saw people fishing, he would take the fish or buy them and put them back in the lake or the river. And of course, he made a kind of pact with a wolf who was terrorizing the local people in the town of Gubbio. And he said to the wolf, look, I'll tell the people not to come racing after you with knives and things and sticks, but you've got to leave them alone and be peaceful, and I'll get the people to put out food for you. And he did. And so the people of Gubbio put out food for the wolf, and the wolf didn't attack them. So they say. Okay, next. And then there's an interesting saint, St. Martin de Porres, who lived in South America and in Peru. And he was a mixture of Peruvian African descent. He was a lay brother in the Dominican order because he wasn't educated enough to be made a priest. But he was really well known for his compassion for the sick. As you can see, a sick person in the background, the poor, and animals too. And rather like St. Francis of the Wolf, he struck a deal with the mice who were all over the kitchen. And the Dominicans wanted to kill the mice, probably with poison, I suppose. And he made a deal with the mice. He said, you leave, and I promise I'll put food outside for you every night. So the mice left, and he put out food every night for the mice. And he wasn't canonized till 1962, which is interesting. And then we have another evangelical Anglican Christian, William Wilberforce, obviously known for campaigning against the slave trade and slavery itself. But he was also very concerned about cruelty to animals. And he helped found the RSPCA in 1824, along with two other Christian people and a Jew. Okay. And of course, we have prominent Christians today, like Andrew Lindsay, who in one of his books says, does the church really see the suffering of farm animals? Has it grasped that we have turned God's creatures into meat machines? And just a little anecdote about Andrew, whom I know. He used to be the chaplain at Essex University many moons ago. And there used to be, outside his office window, he could see the lawn and all the grass and rabbits on the grass. Well, the university decided to kill all the rabbits, and he decided to go on strike. Unfortunately, they killed the rabbits and he was dismissed. Okay, next, please. Next, please, Brian. Yeah. So even, oh, you've gone too far back one, if you can. Yeah. So Pope St. John Paul, that's the Polish Pope. And he said the compassion of the Lord extends to every living creature. And that's kind of echoed by Pope Francis, who said, man must therefore respect the particular goodness of every creature. Okay, next, please. And St. Francis also said something which is probably a little bit revolutionary for a pope. He was talking to a youth conference a couple of years ago, and he said, in certain areas of the world too, it would be appropriate to consume less meat. I know people tried to make him go vegan for Lent and all sorts of things, but you know, he's an intelligent man. Let's hope he'll be with us a bit longer. But it was interesting that he actually said appropriate to consume less meat. I mean, even Keir Starmer, who doesn't eat meat himself, can't say this because he's so afraid of upsetting people. Okay, next. And so I'm just going to run through a few of the kind of ways we exploit animals in farming, because all these methods of farming came from the West, if you like, from the Christian world. And they've been adopted all over the world. But, you know, America, first of all, the UK and Europe. So hens in battery cages. And actually, these were filmed in South America. So they stand on wire mesh. You can see how uncomfortable that must be. Their beaks are trimmed. You can see that hen with her head outside the cage. Her beak has been cut back. And that's so that they don't injure each other. And of course, they can't spread their wings, as you can see. And they've no nest box for laying eggs. And research is showing that hens are very motivated to have a nice, quiet place in which to lay their eggs. Next, please. So those broiled chickens reared for meat, the broiler chickens, a huge proportion of them go lame because they can't support their weight. And turkeys, same thing. They go lame. They're bred to be much too fat and meaty because it's meat that makes the money, the muscle. In fact, turkeys are now so heavy that they can't mate naturally. It all has to be done by artificial insemination. Okay, so this, you know, you might look at this and think, oh, well, that's okay. They're free range, they're outdoors. It's not really like free range. They're just in mud fields. There's no grass, there's no shelter in a very hot climate. The forest is being cut down. Indigenous people's homes have been destroyed, and biodiversity is being destroyed. And you can see in the background some trees and bushes and things. And this is what it should have been. But instead, it's people making money out of cattle. And you can see a lot of the cattle are lined up beside the road. And that's because there's kind of mangers a long place there. And they go along a couple of times a day and put lots of food in there for the cattle to eat because there's no grass, they can't eat grass, so they're eating soy and maize and so on. So that's the bad side, outside, but not good. And of course, pigs fattened indoors. I mean, look at the floor, so uncomfortable. It's slatted so that their poo can go through, but their tails are cut off so that they can't bite each other's tails, because then infection could set in and you might need an antibiotic or a vet, and that costs money. They've got no straw, and they're unable to root, and they're bored stiff. Highly intelligent animals. And what they love to do, if you watch a pig outside, they love to get their very sensitive snout into the soil, or at least into straw, and push it forward. And this is how they find their food, in the soil, roots and insects and things. So this is a horrible environment. Okay, next. And finally, dairy cows. Compassion filmed this farm in Germany, but it could be anywhere. And you can see those poor old cows have been bred to have massive udders so they can have lots of milk in them. They don't go out. You can see they're chained by the neck, these ones. They're not always chained by the neck, but these ones are. Lameness is common. Well, look at the filthy floor, not surprising. Mastitis is common, and they're usually culled by the time they're 5 years old. Now, cows would naturally live to sort of 20 plus, a bit like a horse, but they don't. As soon as their sort of milk yield goes down a little bit, they're culled. Okay, next, please. So we move on to Islam. And there's some lovely quotes in the Holy Book, the Quran. It says there's not a creature that moves on earth whose provision is not his concern, God's concern. He knows where it lives and its final resting place. And that's got echoes of that Christian thing about the birds as well. Okay. So at the end of the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, Muslims do sacrifice an animal, usually a sheep or a goat, but it's absolutely vital that 2/3 of the meat is given to the poor. Otherwise, it's not a proper sacrifice. Okay, next. So the Quran says all the creatures that crawl on the earth and those that fly with their wings are communities like yourselves. Then unto the Lord they will be gathered. And that last bit of that sentence, they will be gathered to the Lord. I mean, that seems to imply that as well as humans being resurrected and going to be with God in heaven, then so will animals. And, you know, some Muslims are a bit doubtful about that, but a lot of them think, yeah, they will. Okay. And the Quran also puts people in their place. The creation of the heavens and earth is greater by far than the creation of mankind, that most people do not know it. So the creation of the earth and the heavens is much more important than us. I know we're all very anthropocentric and think we're the most important creatures in the world. Well, most people do. But humans are supposed, in Islam, humans should act as Khalifa. That means sort of trustees, guardians for the earth and care for it. And the Quran says, do not strut arrogantly about the earth, which is, of course, is what most people tend to do. Okay, next. But the religion of Islam is obviously not a vegetarian religion. It says, and the grazing livestock he has created for you, and from them you eat. So notice it says the grazing livestock. It doesn't say the factory farm chicken. Well, of course, there wasn't factory farming in those days, but that is what Muslims are allowed to eat. But there's another side to that. Next, please. It says you find beauty in them when you bring them home to rest and when you drive them out to pasture. So there's a kind of aesthetic feeling for the beauty of animals themselves. Next, please. And there's a really good story in one of the hadith, which are the stories about the Prophet Muhammad. He went to visit somebody and found his camel in a dreadful state. And when the man came out of his house, Muhammad said to him, don't you fear God with regard to this animal whom God has given to you? For the camel complained to me that you starve him and work him endlessly. So there's a very practical example of care for an animal that's having a rotten life. Okay, next. And the Prophet was asked if acts of charity even to animals were rewarded by God. And he replied, yes, there is a reward for acts of charity to every beast alive. So in other words, if you're kind to a human, that's good. But if you're kind to an animal, that's equally good. And so this is a book written by Mr. Masri, whom I knew personally, lovely man. And he wrote this book, Animal Welfare in Islam, which is still available. And he said, how right is it to deny these creatures of God their natural instincts so that we may eat the end produce? And he was talking about factory farming there and saying that's not the way to treat animals. The next, please. And of course, unfortunately, all the bad habits of factory farming have spread all over the world. This is a dairy farm in Saudi Arabia. It could be in England. It could be in America. It could be in China. But the Quran says something really important. People eat what is good. And the word for that is tayyib. And lawful, which means halal means lawful. But then you look at these chickens and, you know, the Muslim population does eat a lot of chickens. Obviously, they don't eat pork like Jews. They eat beef and lamb and goat. But can factory farm meat from chickens like these, could that be tayyib? Could it be good, wholesome, pure, which is the meaning of tayyib? So if you've got Muslim friends, or some of you are Muslims, I think this is a really good talking point to have, because the Quran says that the food you have must not only be allowed, which halal means permitted, allowed, but also tayyib, or good. Okay, sorry, next. We move on to Hinduism. And the Upanishads, there's a whole series of Upanishads, which are very important books within Hinduism. So how can the multiplicity of life to do the one who sees its unity? And there's a lot in Hinduism of this nature. Carry on. So, I mean, the origins of Hinduism are a bit obscure, but the Indus Valley civilization is part of the origins of it. But as you can see, sacrifice, as I said, sacrifice always seems to be there within religions. Next. But there's also a lot in the Vedas, who are the oldest Hindu books. Those noble souls who practice meditation and other yogic ways, who are ever careful about all beings, who protect all animals, are the ones who are actually serious about spiritual practices. So things were moving on. Next. And one of the Upanishads is very much about a sort of loving God, the Lord of love, omnipresent, dwelling in the heart of every living creature. So not just in humans, but in animals too. Next, please. And this Upanishad, those who see all creatures in themselves, and themselves in all creatures, know no fear, no grief. And that same quote, how can the multiplicity of life delude the one who sees its unity? Next, please. And so the Bhagavad Gita is a very famous Hindu book, probably the most famous in the West anyway. And there's a saying there that we should see the same reality in all beings, be it the dog, the elephant, the cow, the holy man, or the outcast, who's the guy in the background leading the elephant. I mean, sorry about the outcast, but that's what some people were. But there was a very interesting guy, Swami Vivekananda, who was a leading guru in the late 19th century. Apparently, Queen Victoria was keen to meet him, but I haven't yet discovered if she actually did. And I'll just read you a little bit, which I've got in my book. And this is what he said. In every man and in every animal, however weak or wicked, great or small, resides the same omnipresent, omniscient soul. The difference is not in the soul, but in the manifestation. Between me and the smallest animal, the difference is only in manifestation. But as a principle, he is the same as I am. He is my brother. He has the same soul as I have. And Swami Vivekananda spoke at the first Parliament of the World Religions in I think, 1880, can't remember the exact date. And that was held in Chicago. And apparently he became the sort of poster boy, and he was only meant to speak once, but ended up speaking 5 times and became very famous. But he went back to India. But he did set up places kind of following his philosophy in the United States. Okay, carry on. And another famous Hindu teacher, Sri Aurobindo, who founded an ashram in South India, which is still there. And he said, life is life, whether in a cat or a dog or man. The idea of difference is a human concept for man's own advantage. So this is this whole thing, are animals here for us or here for themselves? Okay. And then there's a great story in the Mahabharata, which is a great big book of which the Bhagavad Gita is a part. And Yudhishthira is a king. He's been defeated in battle. He's on his way up Mount Meru, a sacred mountain, to go to heaven. And he starts out the walk with his wife and his brothers, and a little dog starts following them. And the others all die. All the other humans die. All his family dies. And he eventually gets to the top of Mount Meru, and he begins to hear the chimes of heaven, and celestial flowers were showered upon the virtuous king by the gods. And the chariot of the gods descended, and the mighty god Indra told Yudhishthira, ascend in this chariot, greatest of mortals, thou that alone art given to enter heaven without changing the mortal body. And Yudhishthira looked round and said to the dog, get into the chariot, little one. The god stood aghast. What, the dog? He cried. Do thou cast off this dog? The dog goeth not to heaven. Great king, what does that mean? Art thou mad? And Yudhishthira says, but he's been my devoted companion through snow and ice. When all my brothers were dead, my queen dead, he alone never left me. How can I leave him now? And then the god says, there's no place in heaven for men with dogs. He has to be left behind. There's nothing unrighteous in this. And the king replied, I do not go to heaven without the dog. I shall never give up such a one who has taken refuge with me until my own life is at an end. Then said the god Indra, on one condition, the dog goes to heaven. You have been the most virtuous of mortals, and he's been a dog, killing and eating animals. He is sinful, hunting and taking other lives. You could exchange heaven with him. Agreed, said Yudhishthira. Let the dog go to heaven. And then, of course, the whole scene changes. It turns out that the dog was actually sort of God in disguise. But it just shows a lovely story of compassion, actually. Okay, next, please. And then some more modern Hindus. Mahatma Gandhi, the life of a lamb is not less precious than that of a human being. I should be unwilling to take the life of a lamb for the sake of the human body. And of course, he was a vegetarian. And he also said the greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated. So look around, folks. Where do you think the moral progress in your country is at the moment? Next, please. And then another ancient book, The Laws of Manu. He who injures innocent beings with the desire to give himself pleasure never finds happiness, neither in life nor in death. Okay, next, please. And of course, there are contradictions in Hinduism, just like Christianity and all that factory farming. So one of the most popular Hindu gods is Ganesha, who's got an elephant head. And there's a whole story about why he's got an elephant head, but never mind. But he's really popular throughout India, and there's a big festival for Ganesh every year, and people take statues of Ganesh and take it through the streets, and then they're all disposed of in the river. And of course, they're made of clay, so they disintegrate. Okay, next. But then you see the actual reality for some elephants in India. This is a temple elephant, and he's chained by the leg. You can see the hind leg there. And, you know, that's where he lives most of the time, except when there's a festival, he's taken out and paraded in front of the faithful. So there's, you know, an anomaly there. Next, please. And then you've got Krishna, who's famous for being not only a much-loved god, but also a cowherder. Next, please. And yet you've got a dairy farm in India. It's not a very advanced one, but you see the cows standing in their own muck. Nothing special about it, but again, it's an anomaly that cows are much loved, but in the dairy farm, it's just like anywhere else. Next. So we go on to Buddhism. It says, may all beings everywhere be happy in this prayer. Next. So Buddhists see animals as sentient beings. That is absolutely definite. Next, please. And there are stories about the Buddha's previous incarnations before he actually became the Buddha. And in one of these incarnations, he was out with his brothers in the forest, and they came across a tigress who was starving, and she had newly born cubs with her. And she was so weak she couldn't hunt to get food. And so they were probably all going to die. So in this incarnation of the Buddha, he took a pointed bamboo stick, and killed himself and lay down so that the tigress could eat him. And therefore she'd be all right, and she'd get strong enough to go and hunt for her cubs. Okay. And the Dhammapada, which is, you know, the story of the Buddha and his sayings, all beings tremble before violence, all fear death, all love life. See yourself in others, then whom can you hurt? What harm can you do? Okay, next. And this lovely prayer, the Karaniya Metta Sutta, may all beings everywhere be happy. May they be healthy. May they be at peace. May they be free. And that's all beings, not just human beings. Okay, next. And the Dalai Lama quotes this famous Buddhist prayer: as long as space endures, as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain and dispel the miseries of the world. So there's, a religious Buddhist will try to live a good life, and then if they're about to, die and enter nirvana and peace forever and so on, if they say, well, actually, I won't. I'd like to be reborn and come back and help more beings in this world. So that's an ambition of many Buddhists. Okay, next. And then another famous Buddhist teacher who only died recently, a couple of years ago, Thich Nhat Hanh, who came from Vietnam, but he had his center in the south of France, which is still there. By eating meat, we share the responsibility of climate change, the destruction of our forests, and the poisoning of our air and water. The simple act of becoming vegetarian will make a difference in the health of our planet. He's got lots of really good books. Okay, next. And then Mathieu Ricard, who's a French Tibetan Buddhist. He's a vegan. He's written this book, A Plea for the Animals, which you'd probably really like. And as he points out, we love dogs, but we eat pigs and we wear cows. Please make your heart big enough to include all sentient beings without exception. Okay. Unfortunately, all this good teaching in Buddhism, but Thailand, which is over about 90% Buddhist, raises over 300 million chickens a year and exports a lot of them as well. Same old factory farm. Next. And the national sport is cockfighting. So, you see everyone's engrossed in this cockfight. A horrible, cruel sport. So very quickly look at a couple of other faiths. Sikhism. And the Guru Granth Sahib is actually a book. It's a book of all the sayings of the gurus and founders of Sikhism. And it says, avoid hurt or injury to any sentient being so that peace may come to your mind. Next. And that's the Golden Temple in Amritsar in North India, which is the most sacred place for Sikhs. But interesting, it says the merit of pilgrimages to the 68 holy places and that of other virtues besides do not equal having compassion for other living beings. Okay, next, please. And in every Sikh temple or Gurdwara, at lunchtime every day, they will serve free lunch. So if you're feeling hungry and have no money, that's where you need to go. And that place is called the Langar. And the food they serve is always vegetarian, usually rice, chapati, and dal. Okay, next, please. And a more modern Sikh leader says those who meditate and connect with the light within them often choose a plant-based diet as consistent with their spiritual values. Okay, next, please. So Jainism, which this sutra is part of the teaching, all breathing, living, sentient creatures should not be slain, and Jains do not eat meat. So they should not be slain or treated with violence, nor abused, nor tormented, nor driven away. This is the pure, unchangeable, eternal law. Okay. Jains believe in these three essential elements, which is non-violence, simplicity, and austerity. Next. So just a quick look at some of the First Nations peoples and their beliefs. Next. So if you look at First Nations beliefs in North America, and of course there were different tribes and groups, they didn't all believe exactly the same thing, but Chief Seattle, who was very famous, said, we are part of the earth. It's part of us, for all things are connected. Every part of this earth is sacred to my people. The deer, the horse, the great eagle, these are our brothers. Remember, that's what Swami Vivekananda said as well. They're our brothers. And one of the schools, First Nations schools in this Onondaga territory, every day, instead of saying the Lord's Prayer or something at assemble, this is one of the things the children say, let us put our minds together as one and send our thanks to the animals. Now our minds are one. I think it's rather nice. I wish schools here did that. Next. So the First Nations peoples of Australia, they have this concept of country, which is not like the countryside. It includes the countryside, but it's like everything. It's people, it's animals, it's the earth, it's the trees, the stones, the river. Country is loved, needed, and cared for, and country loves, needs, and cares for her people in turn. Country is family, culture, identity. Country itself. Okay, next, please. And one of the First Nations elders said, we cultivate our land, but in a way different from the white man. We endeavor to live with the land. They seem to live off it, which unfortunately is true. And finally, just a quick look at Rastafarianism, which is probably the most sympathetic religion to veganism. Next. So this guy, Muta Baruka, is a dub poet, a musician, and educator. And he says, I think we should respect the lives of all creatures on earth. I don't use animal products. And basically, Rastafarians are supposed to follow an ITAL diet, which is a vegan diet. Next. And Benjamin Zephaniah, so sad we lost him, said, I'm vegan because I love animals. The mindset that permitted atrocities to humans in the past is the same as the mindset that allows abuse of animals today. So at the end of my presentation, there's a very short, like 2 minutes of film, which may or may not show. Animal welfare is important because animals are sentient beings. That's what I believe. They can feel fear, etc., etc. So that's the book again. We can go on, Brian, to the film, and let's hope the film will work. But if it doesn't, just leave it. Oh, not hearing the sound. No, well, if we can't hear the sound, never mind. You're on mute yourself, Brian. That could be. Can't get rid of it. Well, don't worry. Leave the film. Just it'd be nice to have time for questions or comments.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure. I think there was a problem with something coming up on the screen.
Yeah, don't worry. Don't worry.
That part. If anybody has any questions, if they'd like to put them in the chat or just raise your hand, and then we can take some questions. I know there's some comments in the chat box. I think what I got from the presentation, and just say thank you again for talking to us. It's just how inconsistent every single religion is. And they've got one message and then there's the other message. And in terms of the practitioners also, but for many religions, those who are compassionate towards animals tend to be the minority, whether it's Judaism, Christianity, and other religions as well. So it's a challenge when you're trying to debate with, I don't know, maybe you've had debates with people from other religions who have been meat-eating individuals because they've got it so much in their belief that they have to do it. And because there's part of Judaism and scriptures, they're saying, well, I have to eat meat because this is the tradition, or this is what we've been doing. And you saw about the animal sacrifices within Islam and so on and so forth. So it's a very challenging situation that we can get ourselves into if we're trying to debate, why somebody who has got very strong religious beliefs should go vegetarian or vegan. But I think having a book like yours can be helpful in helping moving in that direction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wrote the book because I hope it would be helpful and a bit of a challenge to religious leaders and to people of faith. And I mean, I know people in every religion who would love their leaders to be giving them some leadership on this, but mostly they're not getting it. I mean, there are exceptions. I mean, if you're Catholic, there's Bishop John Arnold, and there's some Anglican bishops as well. But there are harvest festivals held in most Christian churches at harvest time. And they often say, oh, bring your pets. So people come along with their dogs, if they bring their cat, if they're brave enough. But they don't bring pigs and chickens and things like that. And these are the animals that really need their help.
Yeah. I've got John's got a question. If you want to, you are unmuted. Hi, John.
Yeah, a little sign came up saying I should unmute. But anyway, yes. Yes, very interesting. And I enjoyed hearing about all the different religions. But I'm just wondering whether you've ever contacted the Humanist Society to see how whether humanists have an attitude towards animals and to be able to compare it with the different religions.
Well, actually, they asked me to speak at a conference in 2018, I think. And I would say it's like everything else. Actually, there doesn't seem to be anything specific about animals, but at least they asked me to speak.
Yeah, well, that's a good sign. Yeah.
Martin Lake is on the meeting here today, because I know he's a humanist. I think just as with all religions, there's some that will be vegan and there's many that will not be, I suspect. Are there any? I've got a couple of hands. Let me just see who else has got their hands up. Delaney, if you want to unmute.
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute but keep my video off. Hi, okay. Thank you so much for that. That was absolutely amazing. I haven't read your book yet, Joyce, but I definitely am heading to find that out and to grab it. I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation and the quotes in particular. So I work in an animal rescue in a place which is very much multicultural, and the people are very devout, but they have no idea. So I'm definitely going to use this to to say, if you are so religious, then that does include animals. So I wanted to to thank you.
Oh, well, I mean, if the book can help, or any of the quotes, so whichever faith they belong to, they can feel kind of ownership of being kind to animals, because it is there in every faith. Yeah. Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Nicole, if you want to ask your question, please, Nicole. Hopefully she can hear me. Hello, Nicole. It's got a hand up.
Well, shall we go to Anthony?
Yeah, Anthony. Hi, Anthony.
Hi. Hi, Joyce. Nice to see you again after so long. And thanks very much for your interesting talk. I wanted to touch on a subject that I think is probably very sensitive, and that is ritual slaughter. It seems to me that there's more and more, particularly halal meat, around in this country, much more than is needed for the Muslim community. I notice a lot of shops or some restaurants, I believe, and some supermarkets even only sell halal meat so that they can cater for religious shoppers, Muslim shoppers. Because obviously you can't tell the difference between two bits of meat. You can't have, it's difficult to differentiate between a halal piece of meat and a normal piece of meat. But this does mean that the basic rule of slaughter in this country, which is that animals should be stunned first, is being got around in a big way. And I'm just wondering if there's any, I don't see any animal protection organizations, Compassionate World Farming or any others, actually addressing this. And I can understand that because I think it's incredibly sensitive. But I'm just wondering if you see any way through this.
I think it's very difficult. We have addressed it, and so has the RSPCA, I have to say. But I kind of, the halal thing goes back to teaching that an animal must not be injured when it's slaughtered, and slaughter means the knife. And I actually gave a talk at the big Islamic Centre near Regent's Park in London, the mosque with the big golden dome. Just in November last, and I did a presentation. Obviously, it was mostly about Islam, but they asked me to mention other faiths. And at the end, the director of the center, Dr. Dubian, stood up and he said, Muslims have nothing against stunning as long as the animal is not injured first. So, I think there's a lot of discussion to be had. The other thing is, to be honest, non-Muslims have a lot to answer for if they eat pork, because the way that pigs are now slaughtered is absolutely abominable. They are put in a kind of cages at the slaughterhouse, and highly, carbon dioxide gas is pumped in. And carbon dioxide pigs are very aversive to carbon dioxide. They absolutely hate it. So they're all struggling to get out and they can't. And obviously gradually it takes effect and they sort of become limp and everything. But, for a minute or two, they are in a terrible state. So if somebody eats pork, they're not in a position to criticize anybody else, because that is actually probably more cruel than a well done halal or kosher slaughter done with a sharp knife. But, I don't want to make comparisons really. I just say it would be nice if in, an age when we can go to the moon, that we find some painless way of killing animals, if you're going to kill them at all. And obviously we all hope that perhaps the day will come when we don't.
Thanks.
Question. John's got another question. Hi, John.
Yep. Hello there. Yes. I was interested in your the article on Judaism, and you mentioned it began on a vegan diet, and then it was at the time of Noah that permission was given to eat meat. Did you include in your book that there's a quote from the prophet Isaiah, and it says about the future? It says, "The lion will eat straw like the ox, and there will be no more killing in my holy mountain." And a lot of people think that means we will eventually go back to the vegan diet.
Well, without looking back at my book, I can't remember if I did, but I probably did, because I'm aware of that quote. And yes, it portrays, this lovely, peaceful future when we all live in harmony with each other, with the other creatures. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. Cheers.
Yeah, Rastafarian diet, but they're only a small fraction. I mean, of the, in terms of world religions, are probably one of the smallest, I think. I mean, we were in Jamaica, sort of popping in. I was on a cruise visiting Jamaica, but within Jamaica, again, I thought, well, maybe there'd be a lot of Rastafarians there, but I think the answer was not. What I was surprised to see were there were a lot of hens roaming free, which was nice to see. What wasn't nice to see was people eating their KFC chicken, and with a disconnect. It's like, can you imagine if someone's having their pet, all the dogs in the street roaming around, and somebody eating dog, and it just feels there's a disconnect there. But yeah, I don't know how many Rastafarians there are in the world, and so it seems to be the smaller religions, and the Jainism are quite small. Hare Krishna, which is an offshoot of Hinduism, I mean they're all quite small religions where there was a vegetarian bias. Although, as you said, Ital is probably the closest to veganism.
Yes, it is.
Right.
Well, there are lots of people in Jamaica, and I imagine that Rastafarians are just a small proportion of those. But Rastafarians, I mean, there are Rastafarians living in lots of different countries, including the UK. And we've now got someone from Ireland, from Galway.
Yeah. Hi, Paul. Do you want to unmute?
Hello?
Hi, Paul.
You can hear me, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I just wondered if Joyce has heard of Father Terry Martin. He's the Catholic parish priest of Worthing and Lancing. He has been for many years. And he gave a talk to Sentient Rights Ireland, a podcast, which was very good. And it's available on YouTube.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, I did a podcast, a webinar, I think, with him just sometime last year. Yeah, he was very good. Yeah, excellent.
Thank you for that, Paul. I'm going to wind the meeting up now. So I'm going to say a really big thank you to Joyce for taking time out to give the presentation to us. Just before you wrote the book, the book's fairly recent, I think. It's not within the last few years, isn't it?
Yeah, it was published 2 years ago, 2023, by Routledge.
Yeah.
And you can find it on the publisher's website. You can find it on Amazon. I wish it was cheaper, but it's not.
Okay.
But you can get it through your local library.
Okay. And I'm assuming, I mean, was that done sort of in conjunction with Compassion in World Farming, or was that just an independent thing you were doing?
Well, I did it, and Compassion kindly paid my time, or a lot of it.
Okay.
So I give the royalties. The royalties go to Compassion and World Farming, not to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks ever so much again. And I'll give you a round of applause on behalf of everybody. Thank you.